Hey, so welcome to the Seeking Truth podcast, Vishrant. Very nice to have you on.
It's lovely to be here, mate.
And this is very special for me because I've been doing this podcast for a while, but I haven't had you on yet. And you are my spiritual teacher and have been for 8 years. So it's very special for me to have you on. Um, so I wanted to just start by just sort of explaining a little bit about um, who you are, from my perspective anyway. And then I wanted to ask you a few questions about your teachings and things that you teach in satsang. So for me, what attracted me to you initially was that I saw you as a very wise man, someone that sees things very clearly and able to describe things in very succinct ways, very accurately. And I was always very attracted to that. And I remember, early on being with you, just having this, not even really knowing what spirituality was, never really having reference points for truth or beingness or any of that stuff, but always appreciating your wisdom in the world and being attracted to that wisdom because I wanted that wisdom. And I think being with you has changed my life immeasurably in a lot of ways. I feel like being with you, I've become more mature, become more in touch with my heart, and also ways in which spiritual teachers wouldn't normally impact on students. Like, I think you've improved me as a businessman and in relationship as well, which is, one of the beautiful things about being with you is, as a student of yours, you don't only help your students with spiritual pursuits, but also in their lives in general. And I've always really appreciated that as well. So I wanted to start. Well, I was in satsang with you last night, and I feel like I'm in satsang with you now, actually. I can feel you quite strongly. But I wanted to describe some of the early satori experiences that I had with you, because I feel like they were very powerful and orientating for my spiritual journey. And early on in our time together, I remember one particular satsang where the whole room started to light up in this white color, and things started to fade and disappear into the background. And I was having a conversation with you in this particular satsang, and everything disappeared except for your body. And then your body started disappearing and there was only your head. And then your head melted and it was just like this beautiful white light, and energy was radiating through my body. And it felt like being enveloped in a white golden light for several minutes. And I didn't really know what that was at the time. It just felt really beautiful to me. And I asked you about it and you said it was a mini satori of some kind. And so I wanted to ask you about that. What is a satori, and how can a satori be useful to a spiritual aspirant?
Right. Well, a satori is a glimpse of your true nature. It's like a brief photograph or a brief video of your true nature. you disappear to a large degree and you find yourself as space. Sometimes when people are having satoris, they see a lot of light, but there's a lot of different types of things that can happen in satori. But it's basically a glimpse, an understanding that you are, through the direct experience of the satori, that you are more than just a human being, more than just a mind and a body, that there's something much, much, much greater, quantumly different. And you came into a Buddha field around someone who was awake, and it triggered a satori. When I was with my first spiritual teacher, Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, I just thought he was a wise man as well, who had a heap of intellectual understanding, and I felt that it was very wise, and I wanted to learn from him. I had no idea what he actually was. I didn't really understand enlightenment. When I got to actually sit in front of him, my mind got blown away. And I'd never experienced that before. I had a satori. And unless you've had a satori, unless you've actually been with someone who's awake and hung out with them, you'll just be guessing, because the experience of being with someone who's awake is mind-blowing. And in the West, we don't really understand it because it's not part of our main religions. Our religions, in fact, keep us quite small. A satori is a glimpse of true self, which is everything. The definition, or the true definition of everything, is God.
And so satori is a glimpse of true nature, and it feels really nice to be in touch with that. My experience then is, for many years afterwards, I was always wanting to get back to that, and could never really get back to that.
No.
These experiences happened within the first few months of meeting you, and then anything after that was less intense. It never compared.
That was the invitation. You were given the invitation to do the work so you can find yourself as truth. A satori, people think the satori is important, but it's really just a glimpse. It's actually an invitation to what is possible for a human being. Human beings can live or exist as beingness rather than existing as a mind and a body. And the satori gives you a sample. But then you have to do the work on your mind to prepare yourself for the accident that can occur where enlightenment happens.
So what is the work?
You undo yourself. It's a reverse engineering of anything that causes contraction in you, anything that causes resistance in you. You take it away. You take away all the belief systems that create any form of contraction or resistance when the expectation on them is not met. And so your mind can stay relaxed and at ease. An uptight mind is not going to experience satori. It's not going to experience true nature, because it is now in the way and attracting all the attention to itself. And so one thing that you'll notice if you travel the world and check out awake people or gurus who are awake is they all have one thing in common. They're wide open. And they're always wide open. Generally speaking, you won't meet people who are wide open all the time. They are generally defended in some way, closed in some way. And so when I noticed that my teacher was wide open, I realized that that was the key to higher consciousness, openness. And the key to lower consciousness is closure, defendedness, resistance to life, which causes suffering. In higher consciousness, suffering ceases because you stop resisting life. You stop shaking your fist at God and going, hey, you got it wrong. And people do that because we're programmed to do that. We're programmed to think that things are right, wrong, good, bad. Rather than accepting life as it is, we fight with life. We fight with God, saying, hey, you got it wrong. And whether they're Christians or whether they're Muslims or whether they're Hindus or whatever religion they are, shaking your fist at God and saying you got it wrong is the wrong deal. How can God get it wrong? It's all perfect as it is. There are no mistakes. It's perfection upon perfection upon perfection.
So you mentioned their defense mechanisms and belief systems, and the work is taking those things apart so that you can remain open. It sounds to me like those are psychological terms, and to me, psychology and spirituality, they can be together, but they are often dealt with separately. Like, you know, the traditional religions that you just mentioned there, Christianity, Hinduism, these older traditional religions don't really deal with the mind and psychology. So how does psychology relate to spirituality?
Well, if you don't understand the mind, if you can't see what the mind's up to, you can't stop it from contracting. You can't stop it from resisting. You can't stop it from suffering. The more ignorant you are, the less likely you are to actually get free. Ignorance doesn't work. What works is being able to see through the mind, see how it operates. That's higher consciousness. When you can see how your mind operates, you don't get caught in contraction, you don't get caught in resistance, you don't get caught suffering. You might watch other people suffer, but you've ended suffering because you don't resist any longer. If you're resisting, you're caught in lower consciousness. It's really simple. Being able to see the mind allows you to surrender it. If you can't see how the mind's operating, how can you surrender it?
So the Buddha, when he laid out his eightfold path, he spoke about mindfulness and concentration and these things, and emphasized meditation as a technique. But it wasn't until, say, you know, the 1900s when Sigmund Freud came along and Carl Jung came along, and we started to understand the unconscious and dark night of the soul and these sorts of things, that humanity started to get an understanding of depth psychology. So how has this understanding that we've developed in the last 100 years helped seekers, do you think, today?
Well, in some ways it has, and in some ways it hasn't, because people get caught in analyzing their mind forever and ever and ever. And that is just another dream that people are thrown into. Really, the object is to undo the mind and then stop doing. If we're constantly analyzing, we're still doing. And doing in itself is a form of resistance, which is a form of suffering. How about seeing what's going on, undoing it, and then stop and enjoy life rather than constantly problem solving, which most of us were programmed to do at school. And I see constant problem solving basically as a form of suffering. How about sitting silently, doing nothing? Spring comes and the grass grows by itself.
Yeah, beautiful. I Yeah, this is one of the things I appreciate about you, and I mentioned it earlier, is the simplicity in which you put things. Yeah, stop doing and just be. And yeah,
Yeah. Nice.
it is nice. It is nice. You mentioned things there, lower consciousness and higher consciousness, and I know you also have a third term, which is super consciousness. So those things to me sound like levels, like level 1, level 2, level 3. Can you explain to me what you mean by lower consciousness, higher consciousness, and super consciousness?
Yeah. Lower consciousness is where most people live their whole lives. Lower consciousness is the dream world, the world of thinking, the world of analyzing, the world of projecting, the world of remembering, the world of problem solving. Because dream is lower consciousness, it's not real. High consciousness is seeing through the mind and not getting caught in it, not getting caught in the dream, having detachment from it all. When something goes wrong, the mind doesn't contract, it stays open. This is higher consciousness. In higher consciousness, everything is seen. You see things coming, you see them going. You're not blinded because you're caught in some kind of analyzing dream or projecting dream. Higher consciousness is very beautiful because in higher consciousness, we start to realize that the only thing that is valuable here is love. And we start producing a mind that will support love. People think that everybody loves. Well, that's just not true. A lot of the time, people are too closed, too defended to really experience love. What they experience, that they think is love, is usually primal bonding, which has to do with the survival of the species. Primal bonding towards their partner, towards their children, towards their parents, towards their friend. But this is a survival mechanism. It's not love. Love has one quality and one quality alone. It loves. In primal bonding, you get possessiveness, you get attachment, you get jealousy, you get angry. In love, none of those things exist. In love, love loves. That's it. And so as your consciousness levels rise and you hit higher consciousness, you open it up enough to start perceiving genuine love. And it's very beautiful. And it's a very beautiful way to live, with love in your life. From there, there's the potential of super consciousness, which is knowing yourself as everything, existence, awareness aware of itself, consciousness aware of itself continually. A glimpse of it is a satori. If it is continuous 24 hours a day, it is enlightenment. And in enlightenment, it's a whole nother world. It's a quantumly different than living as an ego. As an ego, you are at a single point and you see everything from references. In beingness, there are no references. There is just space. Everything, the universe, every particle of it being love. It is very different. And so super consciousness is enlightenment. High consciousness is pretty good though, you stop suffering. Lower consciousness, on the other hand, sucks big time because you suffer until you die.
So it sounds to me like moving from lower consciousness to higher consciousness, there's a degree of seeing through the mind, not closing, a degree of maturity required, and not. So I'm going to introduce a term here that I've heard you use before, which is not falling into victim-orientated thinking.
Yeah, well, that's immaturity.
That's
Blaming someone else for or something else for how you feel, not taking responsibility for yourself. No one can make you feel but you, but people like to blame other things and other people for how they feel. This is victim-orientated thinking, and this is immaturity because you're not taking responsibility that you make yourself feel. Unfortunately, immature thinking or victim-orientated thinking keeps you locked in lower consciousness and suffering. But you're doing it to yourself. Nobody's doing it to you. You're responsible 100%.
So when you say that, to me, it makes logical sense. I can see that I am responsible for how I feel, and if I am suffering in any way, I have contributed to that suffering because I have a belief about how the world should be, and it's not acting in that way.
I just need to correct you there. You're not contributing. You are the sole creator of your suffering. You're not. There's no one else contributing, just you.
Okay, sole credit. Thank you for that correction. Yeah. because and the reason I say that is because in the experience of contraction, I will very quickly go to blaming my wife, blaming a friend, blaming a colleague for what they've done, and see them as being at fault and not see what I'm creating in that moment. So how you go from logically understanding victim-orientated thinking to being able to practice it so that it doesn't arise anymore.
Okay. So you have to remove the belief systems that cause the contraction. But with blaming, it's like we can see that somebody's doing something that's not right, but we don't have to become a victim of it. We can just see this is what is. Or we can blame them for how we feel about it and turn ourselves into a victim. To that, you have to volunteer. So you have to volunteer to be a victim. Bad things happen, and they happen to all of us from time to time. We don't have to be victims of it. We can just see it. This is just what is, or we can go right, wrong, good, bad, and turn ourselves into victims because we have a belief system inside ourselves that says something like, this shouldn't be so. How dare they? And we take offense. Anytime we take offense, we hurt ourselves. We take ourselves into lower consciousness. In taking offense, it doesn't really change anything usually. We're just hurting ourselves, and we don't need to do that. But we live in a very victim-orientated society where the newspapers, the news, the television with its movies and series, it's all victim orientated. So people think that victim orientation is okay. It's okay to blame. Well, it's okay to blame if you like suffering a lot. And the problem with blame is if you put enough effort into it, it becomes anger, and anger is a form of violence. And so when we direct anger at another human being or even get angry inside ourselves, we are being violent. A lot of people wouldn't like to think of themselves as violent, but it's violence. And anyone who's sensitive will be hurt by it. If we're not victims, we don't get angry. If we're not blaming, we don't get angry. Anger basically stops us from feeling something. And so someone does something or says something, we get hurt, and our reaction is anger. It protects us from feeling the hurt. It's a defensive mechanism, but it's a form of violence. And usually it's violence against another. I don't really support violence. That's lower consciousness. As a matter of fact, you can't get much lower in consciousness than to get angry.
So I hear what you're saying about anger, and I want to ask a question about that because, there are a lot of psychotherapies out there that will talk about healthy anger and unhealthy anger, and healthy anger being arising when a boundary has been crossed that is not okay for you, and it can be healthy to know when a boundary is crossed, in that it's a form of self-respect, like knowing where my boundaries are. So would you discriminate between healthy anger and unhealthy anger?
There's no such thing as healthy anger. All anger is violence. That's like saying there's healthy violence. That's rubbish. The people who are putting forward that idea can't control their own minds, and they're probably victim-orientated. There is no need to get angry. Someone crosses your boundaries, say no. You don't have to get angry with them. They do the wrong thing by you. They do the wrong thing by you. You don't actually have to put up with it, but getting angry, getting violent, that's childish. That's immaturity. That's not adult.
Mm-hmm.
And only adults can raise their consciousness levels. Immature people can't. And so we should teach our children to be mature so they can be adults that don't suffer. When we teach our children immaturity by behaving that way ourselves, we're setting them up for a life of suffering, because they'll live in lower consciousness, because they copy us and run true to the patterns that we've taught them. If you really love your children, be an adult, don't be a child. Behave like an adult, not a child. Have some maturity. And maturity shows in the responsibility you take for yourself. If you're not taking responsibility for how you feel, you are immature. It's that simple.
So again, yeah, quite clear and direct with the way you see anger. Yeah, I appreciate the clarity that you bring to it. One thing that I've noticed in myself in the years I've been with you, and I've heard that teaching many times, that anger is violence, and it's painful to others around you when you get angry. What I'll do with that teaching is I'll internalize that and then notice when I get angry and beat myself up. And then I'm creating wounding in myself because I have a judgment that I shouldn't get angry.
Okay, so beating yourself up is also immaturity. The same as beating someone else up is immaturity. It's violence. Violence is immaturity. We as human beings do not have to be violent. Not to ourselves and not to others.
So what would be the correct approach if I notice myself getting angry and I don't want to be angry because I don't want to hurt people around me? What would be the correct approach to that situation?
Watch your mind and see where you're blaming, because unless you're blaming, you can't be angry. Remove the blame, which is the fuel that fires up anger. Remove the fuel. Remove the blame. Now, you can still hold someone responsible for what they're doing without putting in the energy of blame behind it. And we are talking about an energy form here. And so I can hold people responsible for doing the wrong thing and direct them as needed. And there may be appropriate consequences to what they're up to. But me getting angry, that's me hurting me. For what? Why would I want to do that? Why would I want to hurt myself? And then if I did get angry, I'd probably be hurting someone else. Why would I want to be involved in that level of violence? That level of childishness.
Okay, so removing the blame towards the other makes a lot of sense. What should my attitude be towards myself, having already gotten angry, if it's not to beat myself up?
The first thing, once you notice that anything's wrong, is you move to acceptance. Because in acceptance, everything can relax. If we don't move to acceptance, we stay uptight. So anytime we notice ourselves doing anything that creates tension in us, move to acceptance, because in acceptance we can relax again and reset.
Okay, so that acceptance piece then sounds quite important. I've heard you talk about self-acceptance being the foundation of higher consciousness. And it seems to me like without a solid basis of self-acceptance, it's very difficult to do what we started talking about at the start of this podcast, which was do the work to take the mind apart to get towards higher consciousness. So how important is self-acceptance in the journey?
It is the foundation for higher consciousness. If you don't self-accept, you will fall down wherever you're not accepting yourself, because it's a part of you, your mind, that is judging another part and holding it in contempt. And so this creates a mind that is not completely relaxed. There's a tension there as a result of the judgment and the holding in contempt. The part of the mind that is being held in contempt is probably hiding somewhere. So there's energy in both sides, the hiding and the contempt. This is not a relaxed mind. This is not a cool mind. This is not a good foundation to try to build higher consciousness on. This is corrupt, and the building will fall down.
So is it possible to do any of the work, move towards higher consciousness at all without total self-acceptance?
How about doing it all at the same time? So when I was 19, I was an angry young man. And so I studied anger because I wanted to know how it worked, because I was violent. And I got to watch it and watch it and watch it and watch it and watch it until I learned the total mechanism of anger. And then I could start to control it. And I wouldn't support victim-orientated thinking. And I started removing all the belief systems that I contracted over, because I wasn't interested in living a life as an immature person. I wanted to be a man when I was 19. And I saw that when we don't take full responsibility for ourselves, our actions and our words, we are not adults. We are immature. We're still children. And so I was quite motivated to actually be an adult at the age of 19. So I studied anger and I removed anger from my system. I refused to support it. I refused to be a victim under any circumstance. Didn't mean bad things didn't happen. Didn't mean people didn't betray me, lie to me, thieve from me, all the things that get you upset. But I wasn't interested in contracting anymore. I wasn't interested in creating suffering in myself anymore. It's bad enough when someone does lie to you or betray you or steal from you. Then on top of that, you want to compound it by actually hurting yourself by moving to blame. That seems very foolish to me. And it's also unmanly. And so I changed it all. I changed from being an angry young man to someone who didn't support that sort of thing in myself, to someone who's supported higher consciousness, someone who didn't support victim-orientated thinking, because I simply wasn't interested in creating suffering for myself or for others. You have a look at it. What happens when you get moved to blame, when you get angry? Who gets hurt? Who hurts who?
Yeah. Well, everyone gets hurt in that situation. Me, the
And
other.
so people who are hearing this might think, well, this is new news. Well, I'm nearly 70. I'm just a few months off. I've been doing this now for 21 years. No, 51 years. 51 years. This is old news, not new news. But we live in such a victim-orientated society, victim-orientated movies, victim-orientated newspapers and news on television. It's like everyone thinks that victim orientation is okay. Well, it's okay if you like to suffer. But if you want to stop suffering, it's definitely not okay. It's up to you. You create your reality by the way you think. Nobody else does it to you.
So yeah, this is old news. These ideas have been around for well, the modern psychological ideas for maybe 100 years, but these kinds of teaching in ancient scriptures for many thousands of years. Why is it then that society hasn't embraced them and taken them on?
Good question. When you find the answer to that, let me know. Because once you see it and you start operating from maturity, you see it as ridiculous. The idea that people move to blame, move to victim orientation and hurt themselves, which changes nothing, it seems silly.
Yeah.
But our role models, our football stars, our singers, our politicians all support anger, all support immaturity. So where are we supposed to learn this stuff? You were talking earlier about psychotherapists and psychologists talking about good anger and bad anger. What a load of bull dust. These guys just can't control themselves. And so they've made such a thing as good anger or healthy anger. What a load of rubbish. There's no such thing as healthy anger. It is damaging. It's damaging to relationships. It's one of the things that destroys most relationships, anger. And children need to be brought up with love, not anger. When we express anger at a child, we are damaging them, not helping them. And the only reason we do that is because we're immature.
So just to be clear, you're not advocating the repression of anger, you're advocating removing blame so that anger doesn't arise.
I'm advocating the undoing of the belief system that supports the anger so it doesn't arise again.
Yeah.
It's called working on your mind towards higher consciousness rather than remaining in lower consciousness forever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Until you die. Unfortunately, when we went to school, we weren't actually taught how to be happy, and we weren't taught how to love. The two things that all human beings want, love and happiness. But we weren't taught them in the 12 years of schooling we did or the university we did. It's sad. We were taught to be efficient little machines so we could win and survive. But the very things that we crave, happiness and love, is not taught to us. You can't really experience much love if you're a victim-orientated thinker because you're constantly in contraction to the world. And how can you be happy if you don't find love?
I want to ask you another bigger picture question, which is that there are kind of two sides of a debate happening at the moment. One that says society is getting worse. We're getting people like Donald Trump emerging and society's going to shit. We've got Putin invading Ukraine. All kinds of things happening around the world that point to the destruction of modern culture. And you have another side of the argument that says health outcomes are improving, educational outcomes are improving. As a human race, we're pulling, millions of people out of poverty every year, and things are on the improve. Where do you see us going as a planet in 20, 30 years?
Wow, I'd hate to forecast the future, but it looks like we're on the path to destruction.
Okay.
Because consciousness levels are too low. You've got people with lower consciousness who can press a button and destroy the world. And I don't think these people deal in love. They seem to deal in power. I don't see a very bright future unless more people become more conscious.
These questions fascinate me. I've always been fascinated by these questions, but it seems like human consciousness hasn't really changed a whole lot in the last 2000 years. Would you agree with that?
I think it went downhill in the last 2000 years, actually.
Oh no, that's an embarrassment. That's bad. Okay.
People quite often associate higher consciousness with intelligence. No, that's just not so. If that was so, the professors at university would all be awake, and they're not. They're intelligent, but their consciousness levels are still low and they're still suffering. Intelligence doesn't equal higher consciousness. Higher consciousness equals higher consciousness. It's a whole nother game.
Okay, so speaking of intelligence, I am an intelligent person. I went to school for 12 years, went to university, got a university degree, worked in a corporate office setting for many years, doing a job that requires me to, work with Excel spreadsheets, doing computer work, mathematical work, and analytical work. And then coming into contact with you at the age of 28, you would tell me things like, it's important not to live in your head, and it's important to be present to what's around you. So in hearing that, I felt behind the eight ball, because I'd spent so much of my life training in one direction, and I felt like, oh, now I've got to reverse all of that and go in another direction. And it felt very defeating to me. It felt like, oh, I've wasted all these years. What would you say to that? And then that follow-up question is, how important is present moment awareness to a seeker?
Well, you started the statement by saying you're a very intelligent person.
Uh-oh. I'm raising
So I'm going to continue with that in that vein. I was a very intelligent person too. And once I finished 12 years of school, I didn't want to go anywhere near any educational place ever again. I did eventually when I was in my 30s, but there was a reason why. I worked out how to be successful in the world. I worked out that I could make millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars. And I retired by the time I was 28. Now that is intelligence.
That is also totality. You have a degree of totality.
I don't think they really teach us how to win that well at school, actually. I didn't learn about how to win until I left school. I didn't learn the recipe for success until I left school. And totality, yes, is part of that. You become an unstoppable human being. Higher consciousness affords success in the material world. Lower consciousness affords failure. Mind you, we can learn from our failures, but unfortunately, people in lower consciousness quite often don't. The beauty of failing is it teaches you not to do whatever you did again. But some people insist on banging their heads against the wall over and over again. It's just the way it is. You want to succeed in the material world, you become a total human being. You put your totality into everything you do. You don't be partial. You make it so. You make it work. You also get present to reality, because people who live in their heads are actually lost. When you're present to reality, you see everything coming and you see everything going. You see the big picture. You don't get caught in small pictures. It's a bit like being a general. You're watching the whole battlefield, not just some skirmish on the front line. This is true intelligence. The intelligence it takes to do physics or mathematics, that's a form of intelligence, but it's not the sort of intelligence that'll actually make you super successful in the material world.
Mhm.
And the sort of intelligence that makes you super successful in the material world is the same intelligence that makes you successful in the spiritual world. You don't get caught in the mundane. You don't get caught in lower consciousness. You go for higher consciousness because it's a winning game. It is not a winning game to be caught in lower consciousness, no matter what you're doing. High consciousness rocks. And so when I was 19, I went for higher consciousness, which in a lot of ways began with my obsession about clarity, having a clear mind. Because with a clear mind, you can see things. If your mind is messy, murky, dense, you can't see anything. You're blinded. You're blinded by your own mind. Clarity is really important. It's a brilliant start. So you started with, I'm an intelligent man. Really?
Sometimes.
Look, I'm trying to teach people how to get free. And the only way I know that that works is to raise your consciousness levels. There is no other way. Because if you are successful in lower consciousness, you're not going to be happy because you're going to probably be victim orientated. And more than likely, you're going to probably keep going more. You won't be able to stop, even if you get what you want. And it won't make you happy. Fortunately for me, by the time I was 33, I realized that. It took that long to realize that. Because by the time I was 33, I'd retired and I was wealthy and I was living really well. And I realized that I'd wasted 33 years of my life because the one thing I didn't have was love. Because in business, I'd become a war machine, really successful war machine. What a waste of life that was.
So a couple of things come up for me. I hear you talk about the clarity that's needed and the murky mind getting in the way because you can't then see. But I am also aware that we are quite different people. And what I mean by that is I'm more of an academic and you're more of a man of action, like a pragmatic person. And I look at some spiritual teachers around the world that are more of the academic inclination, like Jiddu Krishnamurti, who had, a traditional British education, was very articulate, very well read. And there's a guy, I don't know if you're familiar with him, you may not be, but there's a guy by the name of A.H. Almas. He's founded a spiritual teaching called the Diamond Approach. And he was a physicist, did a PhD in physics. He then changed direction from physics to spirituality because he had a similar insight to what you did. He saw the physicists around him, these Nobel Prize winning, hugely intelligent men, but they were so well developed in their head, they had no heart and no embodiment. They disconnected from their body, disconnected from their heart, just here. And he didn't want to live that way, so he changed his life direction. But those people, to me, give me a sense of hope that intelligence doesn't have to be a barrier to higher consciousness. It's just that the clarity of mind is important. Is that fair to say?
If you have the intelligence, you change course.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have the intelligence, you don't change course.
Right.
And so for me, recognizing that I was lacking heart and recognizing that I was a business machine, that was a war machine, even though I'd retired, I needed to get rid of my companies. So I did. I walked into my staff and I gave my companies everything, including the furniture, to my staff as a gift. And I walked out practically broke and then spent the next 4 years walking around Australia, hitchhiking, barefoot, looking for my heart. And in that 4 years, I became humble and I found it. But for me, I had to change my direction because I could see quite clearly that hanging on to what I had was keeping me trapped in a mindset that was war. And the only thing that's valuable here is heart. Nothing else is valuable here. No matter how wealthy you are, if you haven't got a heart, you're bankrupt. And that's how I felt. That's why I felt I'd lost or wasted 33 years of my life in pursuing success rather than pursuing heart. So you have to, if you're intelligent, you change direction because you see that the direction you've been on doesn't work. I just need to mention also that I've got 6 minutes.
Oh, wow. I thought we had a couple of hours.
That's the part 2. We have part 1, which is the hour. Then we have part 2, which is the second hour, which will give you a chance to get your breath.
Okay. Well, when are we having the second hour?
Whenever you want.
How about in 6 minutes?
That was really good. I've got to drive down 80 kilometers to Mandurah.
Okay, we'll do it.
Yeah. I found out this morning when I was talking to Isha that it was a 2-hour session. I didn't want to tell you right from the beginning that I'd already cut 1 hour off because I didn't want to ruin it for you.
That's great.
I'm glad you could laugh. Maybe Monday we can do another hour. I don't know. What would you like?
Yeah, won't be able to be next Monday, but in 2 weeks, yeah, Monday in 2 weeks we could do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So your podcasts last for 2 hours, do they?
They go between an hour and generally an hour and 90 minutes, but I had a lot of questions I wanted to ask you, so I made time for 2 hours.
Great. So you've got a whole pile of questions ready to go.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
I've been reading them to you. Well, I've been trying to make it seamless and have these really cool segues in between questions, but I've been making my way through the list as we've been speaking.
Well, so far we've worked out that victim-orientated thinking is childish, and that anger is a form of violence, which is also childish. These are really important things to understand, and that any belief system that causes contraction in you needs to be removed if you want to have a decent life and be an adult. So we've worked out some pretty interesting things.
We have. Yeah.
Along with an understanding that there's such a thing as a satori and there's such a thing as enlightenment, but until people experience that, that's a belief system, and all belief systems should be doubted. Because until something's your own direct experience, if you don't put it in the doubt, if you don't put doubt into it, if you don't put it in the maybe column, you become trapped by the belief.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then when it is your experience, it's your own direct knowing, it's actually worth something.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I hope you don't feel too let down.
No, I actually feel it's fine. Like it would have been nice to do the full 2 hours today, but it's fine. We can do another hour another time. It's all good. It's been really nice talking to you.
It's lovely talking to you too. We have another hour later.
All right. Thanks, Fish.
Thank you very much, Betrayer.
Enjoy your lunch.
I will.
Okay.
Bye-bye.